Chapter 16. "I'm really glad we left the house of my uncle," said Rosabella to Marianne, the morning after her removal to the palace of Lord Gustavus. Though there is something revolting to my feelings in being dependent upon a stranger, yet as it may soon be in my power to repay any obligations I receive from him, it is better than the treachery in which I was obliged to practice towards the Duke. There is something so mean in treachery. We're always apt to feel most disgusted by those vices most repugnant to our nature," said Marianne, smiling. "Whilst we are merciful to those we practice, however, I can't say I think there is much difference." "What?" cried Rosabella indignantly. "Do you class those vices that spring from a noble though mistaken spirit with those that are the natural offspring of base, groveling minds?" "No," returned Marianne, "for I think the latter preferable, as the mind that produces them is incapable of making nobler efforts, whilst the others, by degrading their possessors, show forcibility the monstrous depravity of the human heart." "I do not understand you," said Rosabella. "Nor is it necessary you should," returned her confidant. Rosabella was not quite satisfied with the summary manner of dismissing the argument, and was proceeding to question her confidant's maxim, when a tap at the door announced the page of Lord Gustavus, who came to know if the princess would honor his master with an attendance. "Certainly," said Rosabella. In a few minutes Lord Gustavus entered her boudoir. "I hope your Serene Highness has rested well," said the noble lord with his usual pomposity. "I feel better this morning." "I'm perfectly well, I thank your lordship," returned Rosabella, "and the relief I have experienced by having the weight that has so long hung upon my mind relieved by the removal of your hospitable mansion has proved an excellent support." "That being the case," said Lord Gustavus, "perhaps your highness will have no objection to indulge the noble lords who have already declared themselves on your behalf, as also some others of their friends who are anxious to enlist under your banners, with an interview, thinking as I think, and as I am convinced every reasonable person in the kingdom must think. No time ought to be lost in a matter so much of such an infinite importance." Rosabella, thinking par Marvel exactly the same thing the noble lord, instantly gave him her hand to lead her to his library, where the illustrious personages had spoken of were waiting to receive her. It had already been said that Rosabella was beautiful, and now that her recent illness and the agitation natural of the novelty of her present situation had softened her usual pride and haughtiness of her demeanor, she looked perfectly lovely. It was often been allowed that a beautiful woman never looked so well as when in affliction, there being something in the appearance of a timid, helpless female looking up to man for protection and support that rouses every generous and manly bosom in her behalf. Whilst that wretch must indeed be lost to every sense of feeling humanity, who could be deaf to the prayer of beauty in distress? Thus the appearance of Rosabella caused a great sensation in her behalf, whilst her usual pride and haughtiness, which were well known, only made her presence diffident and agitation. Her downcast eyes and trembling voice appear more interesting from the strong effect of contrast they produced. The persons collected in the library of Lord Gustavus were all affected by her manners, and though perhaps it would have been difficult to find a group of individuals more various in their usual habits and modes of thinking, yet upon this one point they were agreed. The personages who composed the most worthy assemblage were Lord Maysworth, Lords Noodle and Doodle, and Dr. Hardman, and the young Prince Ferdinand of Germany, who had been taken prisoner by Lord Edmund, and was now upon his parole of honor till the conditions of his ransom could be arranged. He was at present a guest of Lord Maysworth, who, having in his youth received great obligations from the German Emperor, was now glad of an opportunity to show his gratitude to his son, and who had now brought him to Lord Gustavus to introduce him to Princess Rosabella. Prince Ferdinand was ardent and romantic, and he was just that, the happy age when all appears bright and blooming, before reality has destroyed the fluttering dreams of hope, when we are all ready to believe we wish, and imagine human nature without a blot. Alas, why are the delightful moments of life so transient, and why must we never partake of pleasure without having to relish for it destroyed? Inviting, however, and the unsuspicious as Prince Ferdinand was, he was certainly excessively astonished to hear Lord Maysworth, the advocate of freedom and equality, eloquently plead in Rosabella's behalf that her father was the elder brother of the present Duke, and that consequently her claim was strengthened by all the magic powers of primogeniture, and he was still more surprised by his assertion that the present Duke had rendered himself unpopular by advising the late Queen to rebuild the late palace at Richmond, by which several hundreds of workmen were kept employed during the whole of the preceding winter, and saved from perishing. "Good heavens!" cried Prince Ferdinand, "can you blame that? Was it not better than the suffering of them to perish in the cold of the streets?" "No danger of that, your Highness, no danger of that," returned Lord Maysworth. "Nobody can perish at cold in our streets, because, we always have pipes of hot air in them, and make them quite warm. And as to the palace, it was really quite melancholy to think how many thousands of the public money were expended upon it. Oh, I assure you, it is quite impossible to find a man more deservedly unpopular than the Duke of Cornwall." "Oh, quite impossible," said Lords Noodle and Doodle, shaking their heads. "Thinking as I think, however, and as I am confident everyone here must think," said Lord Gustavus, "it would be impudent to depend entirely upon the Duke's unpopularity. Lord Edmund is beloved by the army, and he is decidedly upon the side of Elvira. We cannot take too many caution." "Oh, no, certainly. We cannot be too cautious," echoed the two repeaters. "In the glorious circumstance, however," said Dr. Hardman, "that the choice of the Queen rests entirely with the people, their voice alone will decide this glorious struggle, and their free, unbiased opinions alone will give the monarchy to its future Queen." "Yes," said Lord Maysworth, "it is true, it rests with them alone to decide the question, and for this reason do not you think it will be so best, my lords, for each of us to repair to his country seat and endeavour by his influence in the neighbourhood to procure the election such deputies that may be disposed to vote favourably in our wishes?" "The plan is excellent," cried Director Hardman. "Excellent!" exclaimed Lord Gustavus. "Excellent!" echoed his attendant satellites. "Then it only remains for us to be put in execution," said Lord Maysworth. "If the princess will excuse my absence," began Lord Gustavus. "Oh, my lord," interrupted Rosabella hastily, for she dreaded his long speeches before the power of description, "think not of me. I must be, indeed, unreasonable, if I could complain of your absence when it is for my service you will be employed." "The princess speaks like an oracle," said Dr. Hardman, "and I think we cannot do better than put her wishes to execution." "Farewell, my friends," said Rosabella, her voice trembling with the emotion as they parted. "And may success attend you. For the present my poverty, and all but gratitude, prevents my wishes. But the time may come when you shall find the powerful Queen will not forget the favours conferred upon the dependent princess." "Oh," cried the noble lord to Dr. Hardman, "do not mention reward. Patriotism and disinterested love of our country alone dictates our actions. We think of nothing else." "'Twould be treason, and worse than blasphemy," said the Prince Ferdinand, "to mingle the thought of self-interest with such purposes. Who indeed can see the Princess Rosabella, and suffer the paltry thought of self to interfere with the devotion to her interests?" Rosabella smiled graciously upon the youthful speaker, though she did not speak. "If, however," said Lord Maysworth, "the interests of state should require a general more experienced than Lord Edmund, I have served, and would willingly forego the transports of domestic peace to promote myself to the welfare of my country." "Oh, if the state should need a minister," observed Lord Gustavus, "thinking as I think, and as I am sure everyone else must think, she has a right to command the services even of one so devoted to retirement as myself." "For my part," said Dr. Hardman, "I wish neither place nor pension, but if my humble services in a medical capacity—" "Fear not," returned Rosabella, "but that all your wishes shall be gratified, for if I should be queen, I shall only regard myself as an agent to dispose my power to the hands of those most worthy of it." And she said this, she withdrew, having the rare happiness to leave all her auditors perfectly satisfied with her conduct. In fact, such was their delight, that each stood for some moments after her departure, lost in contemplation, indulging in daydreams of the delightful anticipations her words and manner had excited, till, like Farmer Ashfield and his dame in Speed the Plough, they were in imminent danger of running foul of each other in their abstraction. The entrance of the servants, however, roused them from their reveries, and feeling somewhat alarmed of having so far forgotten the dignified sentiments they had been professing, they retired to their respective homes to take measures to put the scheme that had been suggested into execution. "How I hate that Lord Gustavus!" exclaimed Rosabella when she reached her boudoir. "Even if he makes a sensible observation, he adds so many explanations to it that the spirit evaporates." "Yes," returned Marianne, "he has yet to learn that to tack explanations to wit is like adding water to wine. You diminish its strength and spoil its flavor. But even he is preferable to Lord Maysworth." "Oh, I don't think so," cried Rosabella, "for a ridiculous fool is always better than a posing one. I can laugh at Lord Maysworth, but Lord Gustavus sends me to sleep." "When an important enterprise is undertaken," said Marianne, "it will not do to be very scrupulous about the tools one employs to accomplish it. It is the part of a man's talent to discover the weakness of the human beings around him, and to make them each subservient to his purpose." "At any rate, that is not difficult in my case," rejoined Rosabella, "for my good friends are so eager to show themselves off that I must do them the justice to say they neither give me the trouble to find out their weaknesses nor the way to win them. Prince Ferdinand is the only one who possesses a single spark of noble feeling." "And he, I think you say, seems struck with your appearance?" "He appeared so." "We must improve that prepossession. An alliance with Germany may be invaluable to us. You must encourage the hopes of the prince, and do all you can to fan his interest into a flame." "But I love Edmund." "Pshaw! How can you be so childish? I do not think you love Prince Ferdinand. If you can contrive to make him love you, it will be all that is necessary." "But you consider the cruelty of trifling with his feelings." Marianne laughed. "I did not imagine you so romantic," said she tauntingly. "Do not alarm yourself, for the rage of dying for love is gone by. Therefore, notwithstanding the power of your charms, you must excuse me if I presume to doubt their murderous properties." Rosabella was much too mortified by the manner in which her confidant treated her scruples to wish to continue the conversation, though the reasoning of Marianne produced its full effect upon her mind, and even, in spite of herself, influenced her conduct. In the meantime, the family of Mr. Montague experienced considerable uneasiness on account of Clara, whose health gradually declined. "I cannot imagine what is the matter with my daughter," said Mrs. Montague one day to Dr. Coleman. "I wish you could talk to her a little. Here, Clara, my dear, do just step this way. You will be quite shocked, Doctor, at the change of her appearance. Poor girl, I don't think she has ever properly overcome the fright she experienced at first sight of the mummy, for she has never seemed herself since, indeed. It seems to me she hoards some secret care that breaks her rest and drives her to despair."
"Who do you quote that from, my dear?" asked Mr. Montague, more interested in his wife's quotation than the illness of his daughter.
"Oh, it is one of the lot I brought from the other day from the Patient's Theme Book Manufactory in Hatton Garden. I've been buying other things, so I persuaded the man to throw me in a bargain of quotations, and very cheap. They were quite on you, and already cut, dried, and made into pills for use, but I never saw such a man in my life. You think nothing at all about your daughter. I really wish you would question her a little, for she will tell me nothing."
"Very well, my dear, I will," said Mr. Montague. But the next instant he was absorbed in his studies again, and had quite forgotten that being such as Clara exist.
"Really," said Mrs. Montague to the doctor, "I do not think my poor woman in the world was ever so plagued as I am. You see what my husband I have. He never troubles his head about anything, and if I were to take it into my head to walk off, I don't think he would even miss me. And then my daughter, but here she comes. Clara, I sent for you to speak to Dr. Coleman."
Dr. Coleman was excessively struck by the alteration in Clara's appearance. The beautiful, lively, blooming girl was changed into a pale, shadow-like being whose existence seemed to hang upon a thread, and whose fragile form the first ungentle breeze could annihilate. "What's the matter with you, my dear child?" asked the doctor.
Nothing,
said Clara, sighing.
"And I don't know anything that could be worse," said Father Murphy, who happened to be present. "For that's a speech a young lady always says when she's in love, and I don't know any disease that's harder to cure."
"In love?" cried Mr. Montague, roused from his lethargy by that ill-omened word, which generally grates so harshly upon the ears of parents and guardians.
"In love?"
repeated he, looking earnestly at his daughter.
"Who could she possibly be in love with?"
"Aye, that's the question," said his wife, "for I'm sure I never trust her from under my own eye, and I'll defy her to fall in love without my knowing it. No, no, she cannot be in love."
And that's no reason at all," cried Father Murphy, "for I never knew a watching doing any good in such matters."
"Well, Clara," said Dr. Coleman, "you hear Father Murphy's opinion. Do you plead guilty to the charge?" Clara's blush became deeper, and her agitation so excessive, as Dr. Coleman fixed his eyes upon her, that finding she could not bear his looks, she burst into tears and hurried out of the room. Oh, poor Clara! The fangs of the most cruel of passions had indeed pierced thy heart, though thou wast unconscious of it thyself. It may be remembered that on the day of Edmund's triumph, Clara had been forcibly struck by the fine figure and noble appearance of a youth who had walked as prisoner to the procession. It was Prince Ferdinand, whom, having formed a strong intimacy with Lord Edmund, had been almost constant visitor at the house of Mrs. Montague ever since. Clara was just at the age when the human mind first begins to feel the want of something to love. In her own family, her affections had been thrown back upon herself, and driven to the regions of fancy to find an object to occupy her heart. She would often wander for hours together in the garden, picturing herself adventures, which she would paint in the vivid colors of imagination, till, lost in creations of her own, she would almost forget the time and the tame, cold realities of life. Of course, all these imaginary adventures could not exist without a hero, but Clara could never fix upon a definite form to bestow upon him, till she had met Prince Ferdinand. Then all her dreams seemed realized, and the secret god of her idolatry appeared to stand before her, the proia persona. Clara was now perfectly happy, and as, from the prince's frequent visits to her cousin, she now often passed whole days in his society, though he perhaps scarcely saw her, or at most regarded her as a pretty child, yet she was satisfied. She saw him, and she heard him speak. What more was wanting to complete her dream of bliss? Lord Edmund's departure from the country, however, broke this magic charm. Prince Ferdinand came no more to Mrs. Montague's, and Clara only heard of him as a devoted admirer of Rosabella. Jealousy till that moment had been scarcely known to her, even by name, but it now shot its fiercest pangs into her heart. She had never accustomed to conceal her feelings, and now they destroyed her. The climax, however, was still to come. One day, as she was mournfully pacing the terrace in her father's garden, she was startled by the appearance of Prince Ferdinand himself. Her agitation was excessive, her lips trembled, and she panted for breath, and he passed on without noticing her. Yes, it was he, the cherished idol of her thoughts, the hero of her dreams, and he had passed without seeing, or at least without seeming to behold her. Was it possible he could have seen her and passed so coldly? Was it possible she could be so totally indifferent to one who was all the world to her? Oh, there was madness in her thoughts. She could not bear her own reflections. What would become of her? She knew not. She cared not, and in an agony of despair, she plunged into the thickest grove in the garden. Though it was summer, the day was cold and chilly. A drizzling mist fell fast, and a thick fog from the river wrapped the grove in gloom. Heedless, however, of the weather, Clara hastened to the spot where stood the marble urn. But as she approached it, she stared back close beside the hideous figure of Cheops, dimly seen through the gathering gloom. "Fear not," he said in a softened, though still hollow voice. "Tell me your woes, and if I can, I will assist you."
"Alas, it is in vain,"
cried Clara, in an agony of despair too profound even to admit her feelings and fear generally experienced by all those who saw the mummy.
"No one can relieve me. I have no hope."
Cheops smiled. "Poor child," he said. "It is always thus when years first creeps into the soul. covering his arrows with roses so that they are not seen till their barbed points rankle the heart. I cannot tell how much I pity thee, so young and lovely too. It is hard that even thou shouldst be exempt from the common lot of mortals. Yet do not despair.
I do despair,
cried Clara, darting away from him.
I am truly wretched.
From this moment, Clara saw that the mummy, almost daily, and her mind acquired a new force and energy from his society, though her health visibly declined. It was not indeed possible for human beings to hold daily intercourse with Cheops without feeling their souls withered. The glowing tints of youth and health rapidly faded from the cheeks of Clara. She became pale and spiritless, while she appeared to have lost all interest in the common affairs of life. Her fits of abstraction, however, her dejection, and her solitary wanderings at length became so evident as to excite the attention of her mother, and the scene we have just described was the result. Nothing could be more painful to poor Clara than questioning she had undergone. She rushed from the presence of her parents to her favorite garden to think over what had passed, and to implore the assistance of the mysterious being with whom she had associated herself with. He was not there, however, and though she repeatedly called upon his name, he came not. The weather was now delicious. The autumnal tints that had just begun to change the lovely verdure of summer into the glowing brown gave richness to the landscape. Since the abolition of coal and wood fires, the air of London had become pure and bright, though it still remained soft from its vicinity to the river, and it was thus highly favorable to vegetation. Whilst, as no house was permitted to approach within a certain distance of the Thames, the sumptuous gardens that bordered its banks were beautiful to an extreme. That of Mr. Montague, which has been so awfully alluded to, was in particular laid out in greatest taste, and its grateful shade and delicious fragrance calmed poor Clara's troubled spirits and soothed them to repose. Nothing, indeed, could have been more lulling effect than the harassed senses in the scene before her. The air was perfectly still. Not a leaf was agitated, not a flower stirred. All nature seemed to repose, but Clara alone felt restless. The questions of Dr. Coleman, the surmises of her father Murphy, and the created variety of new feelings in her mind, she wandered up and down, oppressed by the sensation of melancholy which she had never felt before. She could not define her own sensations, she could not analyze her thoughts, and as she sauntered to and fro without a determinate object, she listlessly pulled the leaves from the rose that she carried in her hands. The scattering of rose leaves, however, recalled her to herself, and she smiled when she saw the mischief she had done.
Alas, poor rose,
she said, apostrophizing to the flower,
I know not why I have destroyed thee.
Then, walking hastily away, she plunged into the thickest part of the grove.
Why am I thus agitated? She said to herself. Why do I feel thus miserable and discontented? Can it be love? Love?
She repeated, while deep blushes glowed upon her cheeks, and she started to echo her own voice. She threw herself upon the turfy bank under a shady tree, and, resting her head upon her hand, watched through the leaves the light fleecy clouds that drifted along the sky. Still oppressed by the painful nature of her own sensations, she sighed heavily, and tears swam in her eyes. At this moment, footsteps rapidly approached, and Clara, springing upon her feet, hastily drew her hand across her eyes and hid herself amongst the trees. Dr. Hardman and Father Morris, who approached, seemed absorbed in conversation, and Clara, who dreaded Father Morris excessively, kept herself concealed to avoid meeting them. We have already mentioned that she was simple and innocent to a degree, but hers was the simplicity of ignorance, not folly. Her natural abilities were excellent, and her mind uncommonly strong. She therefore neither screamed nor fainted, though from her present position she became auditor to a scene of the deepest villainy. Notwithstanding the influence which Rosabella's party had at present in the state, Father Morris was not satisfied. He wished to make her election certain, and this could only be done by removing Elvira. Dr. Hardman was her physician. The rest may be easily imagined. Clara trembled, and her flesh seemed to creep upon her bones as she listened to this horrid conference, but her terror was even increased when they changed the subject, and spoke no longer of an intended murder, but of one that had already been committed. Clara shook in every limb, and her lips and cheeks became blanched with fear, yet she uttered no cry. nor betrayed her presence by the slightest motion. As they went, the Clara stood like one awakened from a fearful dream, almost doubting the reality of what she had heard. An hour elapsed, yet Clara still stood motionless. What should she do? Would her unassisted testimony be believed in matters of such awful importance against the weight and influence of two persons of so much consequence within the state? No, she felt it would not. Yet if she remained silent, she would be accessory to the murder of Elvira. What could she do? What course ought she pursue? She knew not. A chaos of thoughts seemed whirling through her brain and threatened almost to drive her to madness. The longer she thought, the more she became confused, and she began to fear her senses were actually leaving her when a solemn voice sounded in her ear. Well, she did not know those deep and awful tones. They were those of Cheops, and confiding the awful secret to him, she promised to comply implicitly with his injunctions. It was the day following this adventure that Father Murphy and Abelard were conversing tranquilly together, lamenting over the degeneracy of the age, and their conference was interrupted by the sudden appearance of the Duke. "Where is Sir Ambrose?" cried he in a state of violent agitation. "Where is Sir Ambrose? I must see Sir Ambrose immediately." "Calm yourself, for heaven's sake," said Father Morris, who had followed him unobserved. "This violent agitation will destroy you. Remember your recent illness, your age, your weakness." "Where is Sir Ambrose?" "This vehemence is unbefitting of your station," continued Father Morris. "Moderate it, I entreat you. It will do you no good." "Will no one call Sir Ambrose?" retorted the Duke. As the baronet, who had been summoned by Abelard, appeared, he threw himself into his arms, sobbing like a child. "Oh, my dear, dear friend!" exclaimed he. "They are determined to ruin Elvira. Lord Gustavus and his adherents have gone from their country seats to try to influence the election of their deputies, and my child can have no chance against such treachery." "If that be all," said Henry Seymour, who accompanied the baronet, "why not follow their example? Your influence must at least be equal to theirs." "He is right," rejoined Lord Ambrose. "I do not know why we did not do so sooner, but even now it is not too late." "And what end can possibly be produced by such a measure?" asked Father Morris, scowling darkly at the youth. "The freedom of the election should be inviolable." "But," hastily interrupted the Duke, "if they can attempt to control it, we may surely—" "I was not before aware," said Father Morris in his cold, ironical manner, "that the circumstance of doing evil was any reason for committing our sin." "Nonsense!" cried the Duke. "There can be no sin in securing the election for my daughter, and so, Sir Ambrose, we will set off tonight, if you please." "With all my heart," said Sir Ambrose, and the two old men and Henry Seymour hurried away, leaving the monk alone. He did not, however, remain so long, for in a few seconds Cheops was at his side. "So, sir," said Father Morris, scowling upon Cheops with a look of deadly hatred, "you have proved yourself my friend, in suffering this babbling boy to counteract my views. Did you not boast he was your slave?" The mummy met his glance without shrinking, and bursting into one of his fearful laughs, exclaimed tauntingly, "And so he is, but I thought you had determined not to oppose the Duke any longer. It seems then I did not understand your reasoning in the garden." "Fiend! Cursed mocking fiend!" cried the friar, gnashing his teeth. "Nay," returned Cheops, "why blame me? Was I wrong in believing what you said? Was it then only a part you were acting to deceive me?" "Demon, thou canst reach my heart, but hast thou wish to drive me to distraction?" No, good Father Morris, my worthy friend, I honor you too much. If I can read your heart, I must be charmed to see such devotion to your friends, such candor, openness, and integrity. Taunting devil, be my sins what they may, thy presence is a penance that might redeem them. By heaven, hell itself was easier to endure than those bitter scoffs." "And darest thou talk of heaven?" said the mummy in his awful voice, that shrilled through the father's soul, whilst his eyes glared in such supernatural luster that the priest could not bear their beams, and sank upon one knee before him, bending his head to the ground. "'Tis as it should be," continued Cheops, with one of his fiendish laughs. "Yes, he is mine. He bends before my will. Now I will tell thee why thy feeble reason was too powerless to discover. I am still thy friend. The Duke and Sir Ambrose will only injure their cause by their ill-judged measures they will make to promote it. They had the advantage of justice, honor, and upon open dealing on their side. Was it nothing to deprive them of these fair-sounding words? Will they in future be able to complain of corruption when they have attempted to corrupt? Had it not been so even to success crowned their efforts, would not the minds of men be inclined to side with injured integrity? For so they might be termed as the party of the Duke. Might they not also have said the election was secured by bribery and deceit, and upon the first discontent rose against Rosabella's government? Would they not have recurred fondly to the recollection of the honest, open-dealing, plain-speaking Duke? Men naturally love and respect virtue, though they may be seduced for a time by the allurements of vice. Thus, though they might not have had the strength of mind to resist the arts of your party, their best feelings would have been remaining upon the side of Elvira. This can now no longer be the case. The Duke and Sir Ambrose voluntarily throw away their strongest hold. They rush blindfold to destruction. They degrade themselves to your level, whilst as they use deceit, they will not succeed in their endeavors, and disgrace will be only their reward. Now, do you blame me?
Blame you? Exclaimed Father Morse. You are my friend, my best, my only friend, my preserver.
With regard to Edmund, said Cheops, we must excite his jealousy. If he were detached from Elvira, her cause would perish.
It would, cried Father Morse.
Then try thy efforts, said Cheops, and if thou canst excite suspicions, fan them gently into a flame, yet without seeming to do so. Do not attack Elvira openly or assert broadly that she loves another, but hint it darkly, so that your victim cannot understand, and that the damning certainty may flash upon his mind with a greater force than mere words can give. Thou knowest what I mean, and well hath nature modelled thee for such a part. That downcast look, that insinuating voice, that half-ironical manner, the infernal deity himself could not have wished for so fitting an agent to execute his designs on the feeling of thou than thou. Work upon Edmund, and success cannot fail to follow your attempts.
Now, Machiavel, cried Father Morse, my friend, my dearest friend, my benefactor. Oh, how I could fall down and worship thee! A sardonic smile curled the haughty lips of Cheops.
Learn then to obey in silence, said he, nor dare again to blame designs far beyond your comprehension.